Good evening, everybody. Can I ask you to maybe turn off your mobile phones if anybody has got them on? Thank you very much. My name is Mike Moriarty. I'm chair of the Playhouse. So I would like to extend a very warm welcome to you all tonight on this cold night. We at the Playhouse are honoured to be partnering with John and Pat Hume Foundation and also to be hosting the Taoiseach and his colleagues from the Department of Foreign Affairs and the Department of the Taoiseach. At this time when there are so many challenges and so many uncertainties in the world, dialogue and conversation are both vital. The Playhouse has always been a home for the art of conversation. Hopefully you will find the night interesting, stimulating, challenging and maybe even provocative. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Sean Farren from the John and Pat Hume Foundation.
Good evening, everyone. Before we proceed with our business this evening, I invite you all to stand and applaud the brave and determined resistance taken by the people of Ukraine against the barbaric invasion of their country by Russia. Would you stand and applaud their determination? As chair of the John and Pat Hume Foundation, it gives me great pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker, Taoiseach Micheál Martin, and of course to also welcome our audience for this event. Those of you present in this wonderful Playhouse Theatre in Derry, and those of you who are linking in from wherever, courtesy of Zoom. Ahishig, Fáiltíam Rót go Cahar Starúil, Dirim Colum Kille, an Cahar in our Rugug agus in our Togug, John agus Pat Hume. Taoiseach, on behalf of the John and Pat Hume Foundation, I welcome you to the historic city of Derry, the city in which John and Pat Hume were born and reared, and where they are both very fondly remembered. The John and Pat Hume Foundation for Peaceful Change-Making and Reconciliation was launched in November 2020. It was launched to commemorate the outstanding contributions made by both John and Pat to their local communities, to Northern Ireland, to Ireland generally, and indeed to other areas in the world of conflict. While the Foundation exists to commemorate these contributions, it also exists to sustain and develop the Hume messages of inclusive peacemaking, civil rights, social justice, respect for difference, and their dedicated commitment to partnership. Spilling our sweat together and not our blood was one of John's most repeated phrases, because doing so, he firmly believed it is essential to reconciliation within whatever constitutional arrangements face us now and in the future. And that's why the Foundation is mounting a series of events under the general title, Building Common Ground. And we are delighted, Taoiseach, that you have agreed to contribute to the series. And in developing our programme, we acknowledge the support provided by your government through the Reconciliation Unit in the Department of Foreign Affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, Micheál Martin is Taoiseach and leader of Fianna Fáil, and as TD he has represented the constituency of Cork South Central since 1989, having already served as a city councillor, and in that capacity also served as Mayor of the City of Cork. His ministerial roles have included health and foreign affairs, but he is deeply committed to the Good Friday Agreement and has clearly demonstrated that commitment in a very particular way through the shared island unit, which has been established in his department to support cross-border cooperation in joint infrastructure projects, All-Ireland education, health, tourism, and climate action projects. After the Taoiseach has delivered his address, Freya McClements, the Northern Editor of the Irish Times, will moderate comments from our panellists, Kevin Murphy, Mary McKenna, and Brian Dougherty, and take questions from you in the audience. Taoiseach, I welcome you to the podium and invite you to give your address. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you indeed, Sean, and indeed Mike, also for the invitation to be with you all this evening. It is a particular pleasure to be here at the Playhouse in Derry, a place which for 30 years has been an inclusive civic space in the heart of this beautiful city, with a mission and a vibrant record of supporting purposeful inquiry through the arts, centred on helping to forge a sustainable peace in the community. So this is a most fitting place to come together as we remember John and Pat Hume, who together devoted their lives to the achievement of enduring peace in Ireland. And at this time, as we've just done, we again witness and respond with solidarity to the horror of Russia's immoral and barbaric war on the people of Ukraine. A war which is essentially a war against democracy, about the fundamental principles of freedom of expression, of a free media, of a free society. Principles which John Hume championed throughout his political career. And again, the war reminds us and jolts us again to see how priceless is the gift of peace on these shores. And we remember too just how critical in the darkest days of the violence of the Troubles was John Hume's political leadership in keeping hope alive, to never give up on peace, to always insist on respect of fundamental rights for all, and to work with unswerving determination to find agreed resolutions to intractable problems, working through practical positive actions to build common ground. The Good Friday Agreement was the product of many people's work, of political and civic leaders across all traditions and communities in Northern Ireland, Unionist, Nationalist, Loyalist, Republican and others, including David Trimble, who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize jointly with John in recognition of their leadership and risk-taking in walking together a pathway of peace. The Irish and British governments worked in closest partnership, and the United States and the European Union each played indispensable roles in forging a context for resolution. But the Good Friday Agreement simply would not have happened without John Hume. The vision, tenacity, and sheer will he brought over decades to achieve a political resolution that would definitively end the destructive cycles of violence. John built up, as we know, a coalition of peace in Derry, Belfast, London, Dublin, Washington, Brussels and Strasbourg. I was proud to unveil a sculpture of John Hume at Ireland's ambassador's residence in Washington, D.C. last month, which is a fitting reminder of the extraordinary political relationships that John built up in that city, across America and around the world in his limitless bid to secure peace. At home and abroad, John brilliantly and ceaselessly affirmed an irrefutable moral and intellectual case for non-violence. As he said so often, so simply, and so profoundly, the only consequence of violence is a more deeply divided people. The essence of unity in every society is to accept diversity. And he went on, we need on this island to work the common ground, spilling our sweat and not our blood, to grow together at our own speed. These precepts would come to be accepted by all sides, and they represent the DNA of the Good Friday Agreement. And, as John always acknowledged, he couldn't have done what he did without the outstanding contribution of Pat. his partner in family and political life, his most trusted advisor, and his most courageous and unstinting supporter. John, with characteristic wit and warmth, often said, "I'm a parcel and Pat delivers me." Theirs was an inspirational relationship and partnership for family and community, for peace and progress. Arieste, Gorev and Anamacha. Dog John, agus é gobar in éanacht le Pat, Eiricht, Cuachtach, Sícána, agus ard humpla a bathe, do chuine a bhí géirig a bhainteras a bhaintamach I gcónaí. Credim go méid séhir héal na berte ina hróraguing an Ileán seo, sa bhealach céine is a méid siad ina bhaintse a hócais agus inspiráide dó I siúd a chudan an tíochán chun cín fud and down. I also want to recognise the valued contribution and commitment of everyone involved with the John and Pat Hume Foundation in helping to support their legacy. And in particular tonight, I want to recognise and acknowledge John's youngest brother, Jim, who is with us this evening, and indeed John's niece. John's niece, Brenda Stevenson, is also here with us. And we in politics know, and those of us who have been through the political life, we would not be able to go through it without the support of family. Brothers, sisters, nieces and nephews. We do implore them to knock on the door at election time, to take the brickbats, and so on. And family is I suppose, the real hidden treasure that those of us privileged to be in public life enjoy in terms of support and value so much. In a short period, the Foundation has already built up a very impressive programme of work, fostering civic engagement founded on the principles of inclusivity, respect for difference, and of working for peaceful, positive change, which was so central to John and Pat's lives. I and my government colleagues look forward to continuing to support this foundation as you develop this important mission in the years ahead. The threat of violence last Friday, targeting an innocent man, disrupting a family funeral in Belfast, and the Foundation's cross-community event with Minister Coveney underscores how much we still need John Hume's message and means of peace building today. I welcome that last week's incident and the attack on Doug Beattie's office this week have been condemned by political leaders from all communities, making clear that no purpose is served and nobody is represented by violence or a threat of violence. My government listens carefully to the concerns of all communities in Northern Ireland. As Taoiseach, I have engaged actively and constructively with unionist, nationalist and other political leaders across the spectrum here. The Irish Government will never dismiss genuinely held concerns around the protocol, and we are working very actively with our European Union partners to listen and engage with them. But any opposition must always be peaceful. That is simply fundamental. There are democratic and lawful means for all concerns to be raised and resolutions worked through, and that is where our focus must remain. I want to also acknowledge Sarah Canning this evening, a member of the Hume Foundation Board, civic activist and more, whose partner, the brave and brilliant journalist Lyra McKee, was cruelly taken away almost 3 years ago in a senseless act of violence on the streets of Derry. And I was privileged late last year in the autumn at the Cork Film Festival to watch that beautiful film documentary which captured, I think, Lyra's extraordinary contribution to life here and the message and lessons that we can learn from that. We all stand with Sarah and Lyra's wider family as they seek and await justice and bear such devastating loss. Lyra McKee's talented and passionate writing and reporting, with such strong sense of empathy, of justice, and a demand for better for her generation, stands as an enduring inspiration and call to action that we live up to, that we deliver on the promise of the Good Friday Agreement for all in our community. In the context of what this requires of us all, I'm very glad to have the opportunity to contribute this evening to the Foundation's dialogue series on building common ground. This was central to John Hume's political thought and mission throughout his life. It goes to the core of the peace process, and it demands our attention and commitment at this time. I am conscious of the election for the Northern Ireland Assembly next month, so I won't dwell on specific current political issues this evening. Instead, I'd like to focus on the fundamentals of the Good Friday Agreement, its central goal of reconciliation, and how, in real terms, we achieve it by building common ground. As John Hume readily identified and so often counselled, there are three connected sets of relationships that are essential to the cohesion of society: across the community in Northern Ireland, within the island of Ireland, and between Ireland and Britain. It was the eventual accommodation of these relationships in the Good Friday Agreement that was fundamental to its political force and success, securing the resounding and enduring support of the people of this island, north and south. Through the agreement, we established new interdependent political institutions for Northern Ireland, north, south and east, west, and affirmed principles, rights and equal protections for all, and addressed issues of citizenship, identity and constitutional futures. We created the political space and societal confidence to work the common ground, without in any way compromising our different, equally legitimate identities, beliefs and aspirations for the future of this island, nationalist, unionist or neither. I respect and indeed affirm everyone's right on this island to work democratically for the constitutional future they wish to see under the Good Friday Agreement. The agreement empowers us to create together a brighter and reconciled future for all. And there is no doubt that through the peace process, common ground has been sought out, tended and grown and helped to make life better. In countless personal, community and political interactions over the last 24 years that embraced reconciliation, compromise and cooperation. Look, for example, at how issues around parades have been worked through here in Derry on a basis of respect for all traditions and a desire to find better ways to share the city. And Derry inspired similar efforts and resolutions on parading across Northern Ireland. More widely, there have been important gestures of accommodation and reconciliation by political leaders from all traditions. And the state visit by Queen Elizabeth II to Ireland in 2011, and that by President Higgins to the United Kingdom in 2014, have an enduring significance. In politics, we've been able to work in our very substantial common interests through the power-sharing North, South and East-West institutions of the agreement. And a near quarter century of peace has allowed the development of political, economic, cultural and societal relationships right across these islands, deepening and normalising our understanding of each other. In short, we have begun to reconcile, but we also see that the three sets of relationships accommodated in the Good Friday Agreement are strained, and they have been for some time now. The outworkings of Brexit, including the protocol, continue to bedevil politics in Northern Ireland and complicate both North-South and East-West relationships. The power-sharing executive and North-South Ministerial Council are once again not fully functioning, which is a source of deep concern, as is the fact that the legacy of the Troubles has still not been equitably dealt with, leaving unmet the needs and legitimate expectations of victims and unresolved trauma in society. Important agreed legislation on Irish and on Ulster Scots language and culture in the New Decade, New Approach Agreement has still to be passed. Residual paramilitarism and related criminality continues to stalk some communities, taking and scarring lives. And constitutional and identity politics still structures much of political interaction in Northern Ireland. This hinders political discussion of policy priorities and choices, impacts governance, and far too often sees a reductive and patently false narrative of us and them. As Lyra McKee once wrote, bigger issues than tribalism are being ignored, and no one seems to care. Suicide rates and mental health, good jobs for young people, equality. We have to be honest and admit that these challenges work against the dynamic of building common ground and understanding that is at the heart of the Good Friday Agreement. We have won an enduring peace, but we risk losing the accompanying promise of societal progress and reconciliation. This is a challenge of utmost significance. It is about the kind of society we will pass on to our children and grandchildren. Whatever constitutional future you want to see for this island, a truer reconciliation should be central to that vision. And that demands greater political attention and will today to strive to build more common ground across the three core relationships of our agreement. And that is why, as Taoiseach, I put such a priority on our government's Shared Island Initiative, which I launched almost 18 months ago. This is about redoubling our efforts to build meaningful connections, cooperation and trust between different communities and political traditions. We have set out a broad, positive, inclusive agenda founded on working through the Good Friday Agreement towards a shared future for all. Our Shared Island Initiative involves raising the level of ambition for what we achieve through all island partnerships with the Executive, the United Kingdom Government and right across society, delivering on cross-border investment commitments and developing a new generation of projects focused on major shared challenges for North and South, and looking to the future of this island in an open, practical, constructive way that all political traditions can confidently engage with. Our Shared Island Initiative involves broad-based all-island civic dialogue and a comprehensive programme of published research. This is essential work in building common ground. To scope out and to talk about the opportunities and challenges of deepening cooperation across communities and borders. Over the last year and more, over 1,300 civic representatives have participated in our Shared Island Dialogue series. Inclusion is at the heart of these dialogues, involving people from across all sectors, communities and regions, with a particular emphasis on underrepresented voices, including women, young people and ethnic minorities. Looking in practical ways at how we can better share this island, including on climate action, healthcare cooperation, tourism and sport, and engaging with societal questions and challenges that we need to talk more about more if we are to build common ground and understanding around identity, culture, equality, and how approaches in education impact our ability to interact with and understand each other across different communities and traditions. We are continuing the Shared Island Dialogue series through this year, now with in-person and regional engagements. The vision and quality of ideas that have come forward through these dialogues has been genuinely inspiring. New voices, perspectives and experiences in our communities are reframing debates and defining new priorities for how we share this island. In a dialogue I participated in with young people, equality, climate, opportunity and mental health were among the greatest concerns. They want to see these issues far more to the fore in how we work through the Good Friday Agreement. And for younger people, John Hume's message of acceptance of diversity is core. That diversity is not just legitimate, but a source of creativity and richness in society. The dialogue series is highlighting the degree of common ground and readiness to work together that there is in civil society, across communities, generations and political traditions, while not shying away from hard questions. This is something we don't sufficiently acknowledge in politics. While division and discord make headlines, there is a store of goodwill and solidarity in and across our communities, north and south. A shared island society that is ready to work in common cause around shared concerns. This is fundamental to how we can broaden and deepen the process of reconciliation. And that is why we will continue to listen to, engage with, and champion inclusive civic dialogue and engagement as a core part of our Shared Island Initiative. The Shared Island Initiative is backed by a major financial commitment of €1 billion over the next 10 years through the government's Shared Island Fund. Through the revised National Development Plan, the government has set out new investment priorities across virtually all sectors to deploy this funding with the aim of creating a more connected, sustainable and prosperous island for all. We want to deliver these goals working in partnership with the Northern Ireland Executive. And we see east-west as well as north-south dimensions and opportunities throughout. I've had good engagement with Prime Minister Boris Johnson on how both governments can work together as part of our shared island approach on climate action, sustainable transport and research and innovation. We are continuing those discussions as an important part of our wider bilateral agenda. I established the Shared Island Unit in my department to drive delivery of these priorities right across government. I'd like to set out how the government is taking these goals forward now and in the time ahead. Last year, the government allocated 50 million from the Shared Island Fund to start moving forward with two long-standing cross-border projects, the Ulster Canal and Narrowwater Bridge. There will be landmark recreation and sustainable tourism assets for the central and east border regions. And last month, I announced over 37 million euros in awards by the Higher Education Authority under the government's major new North-South research programme. We are now funding researchers in universities from all corners of the island to work on pioneering projects over the next 4 years. Earlier today, I met with researchers at Ulster University's McGee campus who are leading some of the 62 successful projects, including a major institutional programme to develop an Atlantic innovation corridor across the multi-city region of Derry, Galway and Limerick, stimulating new enterprise development throughout the western seaboard. This is the kind of strategic, substantial cooperation we need to bring us closer together in real terms on this island in the years ahead. And we want to do significantly more this year in third-level education and research. First, establishing all-island research hubs to bring industry, research agencies and institutions together to conduct world-leading R&D in areas of common priority for both jurisdictions, like cybersecurity, digital healthcare and precision medicine. The Irish Government is ready to significantly resource these hubs through Science Foundation Ireland and our Shared Island Fund, working with the Executive and the United Kingdom Government. Second, we want to develop third-level education infrastructure for the North West in more integrated ways, to improve access to higher education for young people on a cross-border basis. I know how important this is for people in Derry and Donegal alike, how fundamental it is to releasing this region's huge potential. Earlier today, I discussed with Ulster University Vice-Chancellor, Professor Paul Bartholomew, and his team, how we move forward this year with the government's commitment under the new Decade New Approach Agreement to capital investment to support expanded access and institutional collaboration in the North West region. We will work with the Executive, with Ulster University and with Letterkenny Institute of Technology, which now forms part of our new Atlantic Technological University, formally established today, to meet this commitment through our Shared Island Fund. I'm conscious also of the acute need for better transport connectivity for the North West. And this is central to opening up new businesses, employment and other opportunities for the region, and in connecting our shared island. The Government is crystal clear in our €75 million funding contribution to support the A5 upgrade, which is a critical artery. We want to see it move forward without undue delay. And today, at the North West Regional Development Group, very good meeting with them in the Guildhall, again, they made a very compelling case for air connectivity between Derry and Dublin. And I'll be following that up with my colleague, Minister Eamon Ryan, in terms of developing that initiative. The Government and Executive are jointly progressing an all-island strategic rail review to be completed this year, including a focus on better connections for the North West. Informed by the outcome of this review, we stand ready to make new strategic investments in sustainable rail, working with the Executive and through our Shared Island Fund. There were 7,000 submissions to the All-Island Rail Strategy Review, 40% of which came from the North West. So a very clear message there in the volume of submissions. We're also championing cross-border cooperation by local authorities, which is such an important part of the Shared Island picture, nowhere more than in the North West. Today I announced a new €5 million Shared Island funding scheme open to local authorities right across the island to support them in developing new cross-border capital projects together. that can deliver agreed regional development goals and our national plan development objectives. For instance, local authorities want to work together to deliver cross-border tourism and recreation projects, conserve natural and built heritage, protect biodiversity, and meet regional skills needs. We are backing them now to develop a pipeline of new capital investment proposals in these and other areas, with a view then to accessing further funding in both jurisdictions. And through this year, the Government will be announcing other new Shared Island funded projects, including for climate action, new EV charging networks, border region enterprise development, and for all island civil society partnerships. This is how we are working to build common ground across government, local authorities, and in communities, and in all policy areas. Given our location here in the Playhouse, Derry, I would of course like to highlight the role of arts and culture. Arts and culture afford us unique, powerful ways to convey and understand diverse experience, emotion, and perspective. We need this more on our shared island to better appreciate our different communities and traditions, our diverse stories and standpoints, and to seek not just to accept cultural diversity, but to celebrate it. There are so many arts and cultural initiatives that we should support in this context, not least this very theatre and a number of other projects here in Derry and the North West. To help with that, the Government will take a specific account of shared island themes and opportunities in developing our new flagship Creative Ireland programme for the next 5 years. And we will foster more cooperation between our arts councils and culture ministers to support the flourishing of artistic and cultural exchange as an integral part of how we seek and build common ground. In closing, I'd like to return again to John Hume's words, which always offer much food for thought. In an address to Shannon Éireann in 2002, John observed that we cannot heal the wounds of centuries in a few years. The violence of recent decades, in particular, has left deep wounds. The hurt inflicted and suffered will not go away because agreement has been reached. The agreement cannot take away the pain, but it is the start of the healing process. We do not know where this will take us and how quickly it will proceed, but we know it is the best possible way to treat the wounds and divisions of centuries past. That task of societal healing clearly remains for those of us in leadership today, and indeed for younger leaders coming through. We have made much progress since 1998. A generation has come of age in peace, and by working together in Northern Ireland, North, South and East, West, we really have begun to erode barriers of distrust. Progress is slow, difficulties are very real, but so is the success we see. A change, slowly but surely, in hearts and minds. We need to keep the faith and keep building common ground across the three core relationships of the agreement and in real, practical, impactful terms for people. As Taoiseach, this is one of my deepest political commitments and most fundamental concerns for this island. And as John said, reconciliation requires not just goodwill, but all the resources of our collective intelligence, imagination, generosity, and determination to this great enterprise. As so often, he was speaking to all of the people of Ireland, North and South. I firmly believe that through sustained commitment and shared endeavour, we will realise the transformational potential of the agreement for how we live together on this island. As John also said, in doing so, we will show for people around the world that conflict can be ended and that peace, hope and justice can prevail. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Taoiseach. We're talking tonight about building common ground. It's the theme of this series. It was the theme of the Taoiseach's address tonight. And it's also been one of the themes, I think it's fair to say, of our three other panellists tonight. You met the Taoiseach already. Beside him is Kevin Murphy, the CEO here at the Playhouse, where his focus and that of the theatre is to foster peace building and social change through the arts. Mary McKenna, Northern Irish serial tech entrepreneur and angel investor. She co-founded the successful online learning company Learning Pool, based here in Derry. And she now works extensively with early stage startups and scale-ups across Europe, especially with female and first-time entrepreneurs. And in 2020, along with some like-minded friends, she launched the Awaken Hub community for female founders on a cross-border basis across the island of Ireland. And Brian Dougherty beside me. Brian's worked in the community sector for 25 years, largely in loyalist areas, and he's currently CEO of the Northwest Cultural Partnership, which comprises 6 Ulster Scots and Scots-British cultural organisations, including the Londonderry Bands Forum, which I know many of you will be familiar with, and which was responsible in a large part for that protocol on parading that the Taoiseach referenced earlier, and the reconciliation that was achieved there in terms of solving issues around parading in the city. And I suppose, Kevin, I'll start with you here in the Playhouse. You know, it's very well known in this part of the world for the work that the Playhouse does on peace building and reconciliation. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about your own experiences and the work that's underway here to build those relationships and to build that common ground.
Well, I suppose the first thing we'd say is that building relationships and common ground takes time. I think you'll see, you know, as the Playhouse arrives or about to arrive in its 30th year, you can see that idea of building relationships woven throughout. But I think you can also see that idea of storytelling, but also the Taoiseach referred to. Our stories are very important, and in the Playhouse especially those that are a bit less heard. And that storytelling is a way in which we have, because it's a way to make meaning, it's a way to connect, and it's a way for people to begin to understand each other. I minded a little bit of that thread that's run through our work called Theatre of Witness, and that's been a decades-long journey, and I know some of the people who have been involved in that are here tonight. And that is based on telling your story, but your story being heard by others, and then you hearing other people's stories. And what is really heartening about that program is that you have people who are former police officers, people who've been in paramilitary organisations, people who have suffered the worst atrocities as victims of the Troubles, find themselves in the same room, and they hear each other's stories, and we have a number of people who've built genuine long-term friendships. That's real, genuine common ground, built over quite a long time. And art is one of those things that just simply enables that. It's an incredibly useful space to have, because what it allows you, because it's an emotional language first and foremost, so it allows you to connect on a completely different level. And as I say, it encourages that sense of being heard and being witnessed. And that's hugely, hugely powerful. But of course, it's also a space for speaking truth to power, and it's also a space for challenge and changing perspectives. So again, recently, we've come at a very big civic moment here, the 50 years since that terrible day in Bloody Sunday, and recently we did a major production called The White Handkerchief, picking up on that iconic image. But the story that we told was the human story behind that. So you know, for example, in all of the research and the connection and the relationships we built with families who had been involved in that, we discovered some very personal stories which became central to the production. One, William McKinney, who passed away that day, was a young man with great ambition, great creativity, great aspiration for the city, a civil rights protester and marcher. He was about to get married. His fiancée, he had arranged, excuse me, to meet his fiancée under the Guildhall clock at 8 that night after the march. he passed away, and his father had to put aside the grief of losing his son and go and meet the fiancée to tell her what had happened. So we rediscovered stories that we hadn't heard, and the power of theatre in that scenario is amazing, because it was performed in the Guildhall, where the marchers were trying to reach. It was performed on the actual anniversary, and it was performed to people who had been there and directly affected by it. And I don't think I'd be overstating it to say that on that occasion, in very small but powerful ways, it helped the city get a different perspective. Partly that's the time, but also the time that has passed, and partly it's the work that all of the families and the people in the city have done. But equally, in that artistic space, it was possible to have that shift. So I suppose I could say art is not much. Well, art is first and foremost a relational proposition. So it's all about relations. And also art's not very much without people.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And there's something about just putting people in the room and having those conversations. And I've seen some of the theatre of witness performances that you referred to, and they're people who might never come across each other in the context of Northern Ireland, from completely different backdrops, completely different political viewpoints. But when you put people in the room and they have those conversations, they become friends, and then that ripples out through those different communities. And Mary, I'm thinking of the work you do, which is very, very different, but it's all at its most fundamental level. It's all about building relationships too, isn't it?
Surprisingly similar, actually, to what Kevin's just been talking about. And before I answer the question, I would like to really congratulate Kevin and the Playhouse colleagues on the White Handkerchief. It was just an amazing thing to experience. And I would like to congratulate the Taoiseach on the creation of the Shared Island Unit and the vision that's gone into that. And I think for the people on this island, it's a really important initiative, but it's particularly important, I think, for the people of Northern Ireland, and that's probably been demonstrated in the applications that you've seen come in. So in this post-pandemic world that we're moving into, anybody can create a global company on day one of starting their business, Freya. And what underpins whether or not they'll be successful is connectivity. That's the thing that underpins it all. And connectivity, in order to have that, you've got to build relationships and have a network. And so you kindly mentioned that some of us had started Awaken Hub during that first lockdown, about 3 weeks before the Taoiseach's announcement about the Shared Island Unit, actually. So we started a social enterprise that's based here in Derry. 4 women started it. 2 of us are from the north and 2 from the south. One of my co-founders, Claire McGee, is in the audience tonight, actually. And we started it. There was never any question that we wouldn't work on a cross-border basis. And I guess our mission is to connect women across this island who are starting businesses, because that's our area of interest and expertise. And we understand the importance that women creating wealth brings to communities, particularly rural communities that we have many of in Ireland, and particularly in areas like Derry that have been underinvested in for decades and decades. How important it is for women to be able to get started with their businesses. And what we found is over the past 18 or so months, so far 1,600 women have joined our community, and through our network have been able to meet each other. And we begged, stole and borrowed a little bit of money, and that enabled us to run an accelerator, which has just completed this week, which 56 women participated in from 23 counties across Ireland, 5 of the 6 counties in the north and 18 of the 26 in the south. And we're incredibly proud of what they have achieved in that time, and we've watched their ideas grow. But what we've really watched is we've watched the way that they've been able to connect with each other and collaborate on projects and find each other and start to build businesses and do it in a way that is collaborative. And I think that's very powerful too. And key to what they're doing is storytelling, Kevin. So that's that's what also underpins most entrepreneurs. Thanks, Freya.
It sounds hugely positive, and from knowing you, I know what a positive person you are as well, and how much your own drive will have gone into this. But I mean, I find it hugely encouraging that this is some of the things that we're talking about now. I don't think we could have talked about this maybe even 2 years ago, certainly not 5 years ago. And I suppose thinking about the context of relationship building as well, Brian, I mean, you've been at the heart of that for the last 25 years, really, mainly working within loyalist communities. And at the minute, you're based just across the Newgate Arts Centre, literally just a stone's throw away from here. I mean, explain a bit about your own work in that context of relationship building and some of the challenges, I suppose, that you've faced in that.
Yeah, well, I mean, Kevin's exactly right. It takes time, and I suppose there's an important context from my own perspective as a unionist growing up in Derry at a time really during the heart of the Troubles. I came to school here at Foyle College on the West Bank between 81 and 87, and for those from the city who remember the volatility at that time, it helped shape, I suppose, my perspective as a unionist. I mean, Derry people are very protective. People are very protective of each other. They're very protective of the city. But generally, I think unionists, nationalists, other in Derry kind of do feel peripheral. They feel peripheral to Belfast. They feel peripheral to Dublin. They feel peripheral to London and also Brussels. But even within that kind of context of the city itself, I mean, Kevin also mentioned the kind of, I suppose, key symbolic event in Derry in the last generation, Bloody Sunday. But what this kind of has been lost from the narrative has been the impact that has had on the unionist community in Derry. 15,000 Protestants were forced from the West Bank out to the peripheral communities that make up the loyalist estates in Derry now. So from a kind of unionist perspective, not only do we have that kind of Irish, British, European peripherality, but the unionists see themselves in the periphery of the periphery anyway. So growing up in that context and in that environment, there was really a sense of, well, we either sit back and be, peripheral to the society here in Derry, second-class citizens, or we move forward and look at meaningful relationship building. The Taoiseach referred quite rightly to the kind of steps that were made in the mid-90s around the negotiation of parading in the city, but largely, unfortunately, that was a negotiation out of necessity. It was kind of a sense of come on board or you won't be parading in the city. What it did do, from our perspective, as unionists, is it did provide the platform and create that initial social capital that allowed organisations like our own at the Londonderry Bands Forum and the North West Cultural Partnership to thrive, because Derry is a friendly city. There are certainly issues around sectarianism and division, but we like to help each other out, and as someone who's worked in loyalist communities for a generation, I've never once been turned away from that help. So what we've been able to do is kind of build on that relationship building. And I suppose what makes us unique from a kind of perspective or a cultural perspective is that we've kind of thought outside the box within this environment for a long time. Richard Haas came over to the country, an American envoy, after one of the latest suspensions of the Assembly about a decade ago, and he identified parading as being one of the stumbling blocks to cementing peace in Derry, peace in Northern Ireland. And we actually, as an organisation, found that to be quite offensive, because what we feel was that parading and the structures around parading are actually the solution. Because if you take Derry as an example here, we have 14 loyalist bands in the city. All are located in those peripheral communities that were born out of the aftermath of Bloody Sunday. Within those communities, you have maybe between 50 and 100 members. Half of those are young people under the age of 25. So you've already made kind of disciplined, enthusiastic structures who are using parading as that mechanism. So what we've been able to do as an organisation is kind of flip over that negative perception around bands and turn it into, to get away from the demonisation of that element of culture and turn it into something productive. We were involved with the Maiden City Accord looking at protocol, but what we also did was during UK City of Culture here in 2013, we managed to turn a negative situation around flag protests in early January of that year to a point where 8 months later, 5 loyalist bands were playing at the gig rigs here at the Flag Huel with Culturland in the city. Purely and simply because for the first time, those young people who were involved in those bands were treated with respect and were told that their musicianship is every bit as important as everyone else's. I mean, we have a saying in the bands forum where, you know, if you're driving past a bus stop and you see kids with a school uniform and you see a young Catholic with a bodhrán, they're seen as a musician. But if you've seen a young Protestant with a flute, they're termed a bigot. You know, so what we've been trying to do is change that negative perception and turn a lot of that negativity into positivity. And it's not just using culture as the vehicle. It's an opportunity for us as well to hit all the other issues that are prevalent at the moment around bonfires, around flag flying, and around other civic sort of contentious symbolism. Because if you're able to access the most disenfranchised and marginalised in communities, then you quite often are hitting the right people who are involved with other civic issues as well.
Do you think there's a lesson in this possibly that could be exported elsewhere? Because one of the things that we're hearing from loyalism in the minute in general, or in more general terms, is they feel frustrated, they feel that they're not being listened to. Is there an example here perhaps that could be usefully shared?
Yeah, but building relationships isn't rocket science. As I said, what you've got to do is you've got to find the issue that's of interest to the most vulnerable and disenfranchised people. It used to be sport. It used to be other forms of youth integration. There's 660 bands in Northern Ireland. There's 30,000 musicians. It's the largest cultural movement in Western Europe. Why has it taken us so long to realise that is the network, the constituent base that we should be working with to develop those relationships? You know, and what we have found quite remarkably, you know, out of the 14 bands here in Derry, and we know it's the same across Northern Ireland because we've broadened our remit geographically. There's huge amount of progressive thinking within bandsmen. To me, band leaders are, to me, the most effective community workers, the most effective youth workers in the communities. And if you can get band leaders working in a progressive manner, then you really do have an important role to play in terms of all those broader civic issues, in terms of dragging young people away from the fringes of paramilitary activity and into something productive and constructive and something that they're interested in, and you'll keep their attention because they're interested in it.
Taoiseach, I saw you listening to that very intently, and obviously we're talking about building relationships here, and part of that building of relationships is just having these conversations and listening. And I know that the Department of Foreign Affairs has funded, I think I'm correct to say, has funded the Londonderry Bands Forum and has been involved in this work. And just thinking of some of the work that you outlined in your speech in terms of the shared island unit, I wonder what your own thoughts are about.
Freya, can I just mention before you bring the Taoiseach in? The Londonderry Bands Forum was created by a seeding grant from the Department of Foreign Affairs Community Relations Fund at a time when none of the funders in the north would touch us with a barge pole. And so I think it's really important to I think it's really important to point that out because from that small seed we've developed to the point we are now, and the Department of Foreign Affairs continue to be huge supporters of our work, so we really thank you for that.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you really on that. I mean, this is an example where the Department of Foreign Affairs has been really progressive in terms of funding something like this and reaching out and sort of working on reconciliation towards loyalist communities. And I wonder where you feel that could go today, or what might be done today, because we touched on this earlier with Brian in terms of the frustrations within loyalist communities, and I think that's one of the challenges, and we saw that last week in the very shocking, I think, attack on the speech and the event given by Minister Coveney. How do you, can the Irish government begin to address that? How does the Irish government begin to address that?
Well, first of all, I would say, just as a general principle, sometimes we develop initiatives in a stop-start way. And I think we've got to realise it's a very long haul, and we should consistently work at it. I would accelerate it in terms of capacity if we can, because I think it is about I think the Department of Foreign Affairs Reconciliation Fund, Community Fund, it's quite low. I would say this when I was Minister for Foreign Affairs, I thought it was quite low, 2 or 3 million. I'd double it. I would seriously, and I don't mean that. No, you have to have capacity. You just can't switch it on and make it. It has to be. I remember being in the boxing club in Belfast in 2010, and I have a boxing background. My father was a boxer. He boxed with Ireland and all of that, so I had a particular interest in that. But it was wonderful to see cross-community boxing club being funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs. But that's a long haul. You have to keep at it. I remember being in Lurgan, where a very interesting engagement with young people in Lurgan who were in the GA. But the GA's community hall became the community hall. And it was quite frightening when young 17-year-olds said to me and 18-year-olds that the first time they saw their, if I use the phrase, Protestant neighbour or Unionist neighbour, was about 18 years of age, even though they were in shouting distance of each other. They had never met, they had never engaged. So that's a problem. And I think we've got to look at education too on that. I think we should develop stronger pilot programs in education. We have Educate Together in the Republic, which grew from small beginnings, which we've nurtured, not to displace anybody either, but to create a plurality of education provision, and that there's a greater opportunities for integration in education. I think sport provides great opportunities. Music and culture certainly does. And I think we should not underestimate that that's where the real meat is, so to speak, is, as Kevin said, in telling stories. And I don't want to bore people. I know when I was in Coromila, it's the first time I met David Irvine. And I was telling him, the Quakers had us going around the concentric circles. Is that what they had all these fancy methodologies of getting us to meet people. And I would stop, when you stop, I was opposite David Irvine, and where it said, ask him who his hero was and who your hero was. And I said, my father was. And I said, mine was Gusty Spence. I met him in the Crumlin Road jail or something like that. Sort of thing. And then began the storytelling. He understood us more than we understood ourselves. I was amazed by his insights into the perspective of the South, if you like, or the Republic, on issues like United Ireland or partition. And he very quickly said, you suffer from that guilt trip, don't you? That all of you do, don't you? That we kind of left the North behind. And he was very sharp. But again, it was through storytelling. They thought that my speeches, and I was a young politician at the time, were written by the parish priest. The unionists, there was 12 unionists, 12. They thought, and that was the stereotypical view we had of each other, basically. It was all nonsense. So you do need to create the fora to enable stories to be told. And I think theatre and the arts give us the depth to enable that to happen, and to explore the issues in a non-contentious kind of way. And I think that's the power that the arts can bring to this. And again, we would, like the Shared Island now gives us far greater heft to do more of that reconciliation work and building bridges. And we're interested, Brian, in sort of that cultural dimension that your community represents in terms of how we can affirm that, and on cross-border basis and so forth. We are genuinely interested in pursuing that and engaging with you on that. And I think finally, I just make this final point. My biggest concern since the Good Friday Agreement, I don't think we really tackled educational disadvantage. And I think, to me, that's the greatest challenge. I was just at an event in Dublin on Thursday around, or Wednesday evening was around school completion program, which I'd been involved in 20 odd years ago in education. It's a passion of mine that every child should get a chance to fulfill their potential and finish school. And I think there's work that needs to be done in the north, cross community, in saying to those communities whose pattern of school completion is poor, to really work in a targeted way to get kids to finish school. It doesn't have to be the standard curriculum, it could be apprenticeships, it could be training, but that there's levels of achievement that they can be certified and a sense of completion and progression. That is the most important thing, to bring those who feel marginalised in from the periphery. And it's one of my regrets that both governments and the executive haven't, in almost a Marshall Plan way, tackled that issue, because it would be transformative if we did.
Yeah. Mayor, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. Mary, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that, because a lot of what you've done has been dependent on, you know, a young, educated workforce, and obviously the Taoiseach was talking about the development that just happened today in terms of the Atlantic University and the idea of that sort of, you know, Western knowledge corridor, if you like. I know that's something that you're particularly exercised by as well.
Absolutely, but I also think that in order to build common ground, people need to have safe spaces where they can air topics and subjects that they want to discuss with each other. And you will know, Freya, because I think we met there. I did some work earlier with St Mary's College in Derry around young women aged between 11 and 17, talking to them about thinking about enterprise and starting a business, talking to them about STEM careers and the future of work. So absolutely, the reason that we started Learning Pool here in Derry was because there was such a talented number of young people coming through the university. We were a brand new startup. We couldn't afford the fancy London and Cambridge and Oxford prices, but starting a business here with the talent that's in the Northwest was an affordable option for us. And absolutely, I mean, our business employed people from both sides of the border, and everybody's the same. You know, you just look for the talent, and there's lots of it here. So yeah, I would support that, and I think the economic corridor in the east is working well between Belfast and Dublin. So I think there's some work to be done on making that happen in the west between Derry, Letterkenny, Sligo, Galway. We've got a new medical school here in McGee, plugging that into the medtech cluster in Galway and making those linkages happen. I think you know, there's a lot of opportunity, and it's great that the government has invested in those hubs everywhere all over Ireland. You know, there's going to be 700 or 800 of them, and every single village has got a digital hub now. Fantastic. Just what we need.
Yeah, I mean, we were very struck today. Again, first of all, the Northwest Partnership, the two councils work very well, and they look at this, the region as a region, and they put the politics outside the door. It's quite refreshing to see, and I'm very impressed by their contribution. I think on the health side and on the university side, there's much more potential. Like Atnagelvin is the natural tertiary facility for the Northwest. I know we have Letterkenny, but both hospitals can work in a complementary way. But I just came from the hospital earlier and I just met a young chap. When I say young, I think he's young anyway. Looking at him in the bed. But he had a kind of heart attack yesterday. A faint heart attack, but he was moved very quickly to Atnagelvin. He's from Donegal. And he had these stents put in. And he was up chatting to me there, and he'll be out tomorrow. But that's the logic of Atnagelvin and the, what's the phrase, primary percutaneous cardiology centre, and it basically saves you from, you know, if you get a heart attack. Seriously, you know, prior to that, people were going to Donegal on a 2.5-hour journey or 3.5-hour journey to Dublin, and likewise, paediatric cardiac care is in one centre on the island in Crumlin. There's huge potential to do what's logical and put the politics to one side and just do what makes sense for the people in terms of their basic health and well-being. And I think there's huge potential on the university front. And we met all those, the research projects, they were around your area, by the way, in terms of entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship. And they're doing joint projects now with the Atlantic University, Technological University, in those areas. And there was a fantastic one on mental health. For example, where computer analytics joined up with the mental health champion, and they're going to have a project in terms of how you do develop, from a technology perspective, apps around early intervention in mental health for young people. So that's what we're funding through the Shared Island. I mean, when I say research projects, these are very on-the-ground, solution-driven type research projects that benefits everybody, ultimately. So I think there's huge potential there.
And in terms of education, when we talk about education, we talk about educational underachievement. We tend to talk about working class Protestant boys mainly. From your experience, what do you think would make the big difference there? If there was one thing that could be done that would make a difference, what would you ask for?
Well, it was quite rightly pointed out. It's not rocket science. I mean, if you give young people opportunity, if you give them prospects, if you give them a career, if you give them a mortgage, if you give them loans, they very quickly step away from antisocial behaviour or paramilitary activity. And I think that's been part of the problem right across the board within working class communities in Northern Ireland, not just Protestant communities, but Catholic communities. And I mean, and it's again, it goes back to that issue I was talking about earlier on about thinking outside the box. You know, we've got to look at how we can engage mainstream education with proper kind of cultural inclusion or community inclusion. There's a really good teacher here, Michael Allen from Lisneal College, who has really got that. I mean, we banged on every school door here over the course of 10 years, and I think my colleague Derek's in here as well. We do quite a lot of educational outreach in schools to try and engage with the young people. And Michael was the first one to take a chance on us, you know, and he gets the fact that, you know, he talks about, for example, you know, the discipline and the structure around bands he finds is very valuable to how young people conduct themselves in classrooms. He would take a young person aside, for example, and say, you know, you come in here untidy and being disruptive, but I seen you at the parade on Saturday and you were disciplined and you were smart. You know, so he makes that connection, and I suppose what we're trying to do with a lot of the broader work with the North West Cultural Partnership, not just through parading, but also Highland dance and other elements of pro-union culture, is look at how we can use that constituent base, that network of young people who are engaged in that activity, and look at their other educational needs and their other training needs and their other training requirements. You know, so it's about, you know, us and the band leaders influencing those young people to think beyond maybe even just the context or the confines of the band, but how they as individuals can contribute to their local communities and how they can contribute to their own personal development. And with that type of connection between the band and the school, meaningful community education partnership, then it opens up a whole kind of range of opportunities for training and for personal development.
Yeah, and it's what all that leads to, isn't it? I'm going to open it up to questions in a minute, but I just want to ask each of the panellists one last thing. First of all, we're talking about building common ground. We're talking about relationships. We're talking about how we create that. What would be the one thing that you would say is most important in that, each of you? Because there are a lot of challenges, and we've discussed some of those, but there's also a huge amount of good work going on, and we've discussed a lot of that as well. So what would be your change, Kevin? What would be the thing you think would make the biggest difference in terms of building that common ground?
Well, you'll not be surprised, there's probably more than one answer to that. But the first thing is that maybe recognizing where we've arrived. There's a lot to be said for celebrating what we've managed to achieve, I think. But I also think the common ground, if we think about young people and we think about society today, the common ground is broader than our sense of belonging or identity. We are in a situation now where people are paying attention to our shared planet. So we very rightly talk about shared community and a shared island, shared islands, if we think of the east, west, and the north, south. But we must think of a shared planet. So the Playhouse, for example, is one of the first arts organisations to hire a climate action officer, because we see this as a way of life change. But also, if we look to our new generation who are telling us, I think the Taoiseach referred to it as well, they're telling us about climate as being an important issue alongside other things. I think if we look at the bigger issues, it will give us some perspective on the still very real local issues around belonging and identity. I mean, we do a lot of work with young people in different communities who are faced with paramilitarism, still crime, and having real difficulty in relation to kind of making positive life choices. So we really understand the real depth challenge that is there. It's still there. So in one sense, we haven't come that far, but in another sense, we are all kind of working together here to move things along. But my change, my suggestion, my provocation is could we look to the bigger societal, wide, global issues and use them as a way to build common ground that would also affect the very real challenges that we face locally in our localities.
Yeah. I think that's a great suggestion. Take it outside of the local and go global. Absolutely. absolutely. Mary, what would be your...
It's going to be a really tricky one to follow, an answer like that, isn't it?
This is
I
the
got
challenge
lucky there,
now.
Mary, going first.
So I'm going to stick with the global aspect because I really like that, Kevin. So I think here in Derry and Donegal, we're clear about our own. Well, I think that our common ground does extend, and it particularly extends to the networks of our diaspora, which we have strong connections with. And, you know, the Derry and Donegal diaspora stretches from the US to London, to Singapore, everywhere in between. And I would like to, so my change would be about fostering those stronger linkages with the people that we're connected to globally, and doing that as well, not just with our own diaspora, but with our reverse diaspora and our affiliate diaspora and all those other people that want to be part of Ireland, and really building on that and using that to foster our economic growth. That's my tip.
Brilliant.
Well said.
Brilliant. So, to going global, Brian, your change?
Mine's kind of a bit of both. I think it's more local. I think the first change I would do would be get rid of social media for a start. But I think the message around, I suppose, narrative and perception is hugely influential and can be hugely damaging. And if we even refer back to the unfortunate events of last week, words do matter. Words are listened to, and in the context of you know, social media, they can be very, very damaging, and you know, so I think how we kind of project those words and how we're honest with ourselves is hugely important, because I mean, I'm a unionist. I support the Northern Ireland football team to a day, but I was in Twickenham 2 weeks ago at the Ireland rugby match against England, supporting Ireland. I'm a member of the Irish Cricket Board. Politics in Northern Ireland and identity in Northern Ireland isn't binary. Yet if we were to look at the increasing number of narrative coming from, obviously, political opportunism, which you can understand to a certain extent, but from academia, from the increasing commentariat who have formed a very narrow view of unionism, but have never spoken to a unionist or working class unionist in their life, you know, and you know, and that feeds through into a perception or a sense of sovereignty being under threat. I mean, the protocol is about a threat to sovereignty and a threat to identity, and this complete sense since 2016 that pro-union, or to be pro-union is to be a right-wing Little Englander, you know, and that feeds into the kind of the frustration and the tension that leads to boiling point and issues like civic unrest that happened in the city about a year ago, and then the unfortunate events like last week. So to me, it would be about honesty through whatever form of media, be it through social media or be it through mainstream media.
Yeah. And I think what you said there about identity isn't binary. If there's one thing I've learnt in almost 20 years as a journalist and many more years living in this place, I don't think anybody's identity in this place is binary. So I think if there's one thing that we take away from tonight, I think that's absolutely right. But Taoiseach, same question to you, and bearing in mind you're the man with the power, you're the man with the purse strings, what would be the change you would make? No pressure.
I just gave a long speech there. We've already started.
but we always want more.
Could I just say maybe at one level, like at a human, what human characteristics are needed to build common ground? So I think the capacity to listen is probably the most important. And I say that as a politician because we're notoriously bad at listening at times. No, we do need to listen more, and I've learned that through life, just stop. Don't have a preconceived idea about the person that's over there or the group over there, which is what Brian has just said. Meet the person. Sit down and listen to what the person has to say. I think as a human trait, that's probably the most important thing we can do to start building common ground. I think perseverance. When I said stop, start earlier, we have a great tendency in political, in life and in government, we start a project, and if we don't see a result in 3 years, we must do some other project. Actually,
This is about building relationships. You just have to keep at it, but you have to keep at it consistently and at a scale that makes a difference. Sometimes you might have to refresh it, rebrand it, even to use a terrible phrase, but there are times when the level of activity, I think, has waned over the years. There was, since the first decade of the Good Friday Agreement, there was a lot of north-south stuff going on and so on. And it waned. So that idea of perseverance, that sticking at we know what works, but it's going to take time. That's what I said, what John Hume said, you don't heal it all just because we've signed an agreement. It doesn't mean you heal it all. I think education then would be fundamental to underpinning it all. Because we can do it. I know teachers get tired sometimes, and they have a point of society sort of imposing all the responsibility or challenges of society on schools. I don't mean it that way, but I do think it's a powerful way of realising the potential of every individual, but also creating shared communities. And then if you add in the cultural and artistic dimension with the sporting dimension, we can build a hell of a lot of bridges. There's huge potential in doing that. And particularly in the sporting world, you mentioned Twickenham. I mean, we were cheering for the French referee, Boris wasn't. When I got sent off. It was a marvellous moment watching the match, but anyway, I won't go into it. And I'm not technically an expert in rugby, but the point is, I remember meeting loyalist communities as a young student. I came up as a student when I was 1981, actually, went to Belfast, and we met Andy Turley of the UDA and so on like that. But the UDA people we met then, we were naive, by the way, we were straight up about that. But anyway, they were all annoyed. There was a famous rally driver at the time, who was an Ulster rally driver, but the BBC kept calling him a British rally driver. And this was the major bone of contention of the UDA hierarchy at the time. He was being called a British rally driver. His name escapes me now.
Jonathan Ray, maybe?
Possibly, yeah. So I think that's that sporting thing, soccer as well as across commonality across the island. Players are moving a bit more now with the fluidity, and pathways that players can enjoy. Boxing is another great sport. That's rugby and so on. Like that. Gaelic football. My own son was up here recently playing against Derry, and he was learning when he came here. He started to text me about the city. Now they were well beaten by Derry on the day, so we won't comment on that. But the point is, sport is such a natural way of breaking down barriers, and people who play against each other or box against each other, they end up becoming very good friends because they share a common discipline. They understand the trials and tribulations and challenges of pursuing that discipline, and they become friends. And that sort of friendship and relationship building is key to the common ground.
Absolutely. It's about relationships, and those relationships just start with conversations like this, don't they? This seems like a good time to ask if we have any questions from the audience. Very briefly, I'm told. Yes, the lady there.
Hi folks, I'm Mary Casey. I came to live in Derry in 1973 from Donegal. I previously worked in Guinness's in Dublin, and I was very interested in all the perspectives when it comes to connectivity, relationships and young people, because I've been volunteering in this city since 1973, and connectivity, I'm a member of the Western Rail Alliance and into the West Rail Lobby Group. And when I came in, I started to work with the London Derry Arts Association, which was a comprehensive group for all of the arts and culture in this city. And it reached out into every community and it had a database of everything that went on in the city. And it was funded by the Northern Ireland Arts Council and Derry City Council from 73, and it folded up in 1985. I was on the member of the Irish Regeneration Plan, and working with young people in Culmore, which is listening to them drinking behind hedges and looking at their issues, and listening then to the data and the statistical information out of the Irish Regeneration Plan, and the numbers of young people schools, the number of young people who don't achieve, the number of young people who take their own lives, 700 attempted suicides in the city last year. And so in 2010, I came up with an idea. And we put the idea onto a page, a proposal, and we put it into each government department in Northern Ireland. And they passed the buck. As Peter Sheridan said to me, he was a PSNI officer and he was Cooperation Ireland. They passed the buck and said it was up to OFM, DFM in relation to this proposal. And the proposal was very simple. It's just logical. If you have an initiative in the university, and I worked in McGee for 12 years, helping it develop from 125 students in 1985 when I went in to 3,500 when I left in 1998, yeah. It's very simple. They had a step-up program, and this step-up program brought in all of the schools in this city that were young people that weren't achieving. And they had a director of Step Up, and I was on them, the convocations executive, and we awarded Step Up award to these young people that achieved, inclusive, all of the schools coming in to a program over a period of 6 months in the summer, whatever, and actually achieving. And then what happened was that the Step Up director left, and the schools that were involved in this logically set themselves up as the Foyle learning community. And so all of the schools, inclusive of Protestant and Catholic schools, came together and they put in a proposal to the Northern Ireland Department of Employment and Learning, or the Department of Education, which would be logical, for a shared post-primary science centre. Totally logical. That would do the work of the Step Up Academy in the university, and it would be their place, it would be a children's science centre.
So your question is should we have a shared
and my question then
post-primary
is
science?
about the fear that's in Protestant children and the anger that's in Protestant young people that's fed through politicians and not community leaders. And so we have to do something with this idea of science, technology, engineering and maths and the jobs for the future, and let's not have a situation where we have young people not achieving, getting minimum wage, and we have jobs coming in, starting off at 25,000-30,000 in the science and in the digital technology stuff. Let's set up what the schools asked for, with all the post-primary schools in this city asked for a shared post-primary science centre. I've been working on this now since 2010, and I bring it down to primary schools. And I say, let's have a children's science centre that goes from the primary school right through from 4, 6, 10 years of age to 18.
Oh, okay. So I think just to repeat the question for the online audience. So it's about the value, I think, of focusing on science education in a cross-community manner, primary, post-primary. Possibly Mary or the Taoiseach might be a question for either of you. We think we've discussed this in terms of the Atlantic University and the benefit you've seen certainly in your line of work, Mary.
So Derry has been designated as a UNESCO Learning City, and I believe that there is the council is hosting an event next week or next month, and so there's obviously part of the council that is invested in that project, because that's been going for about 2 years. I fully agree with Mary that STEM is absolutely critical to young people's opportunities going forward, because that's where I think that they lie. Taoiseach?
100%. In fact, there's a group of Cork women have come forward, formed an organisation to encourage greater participation in STEM subjects, which has grown significantly. Certainly I think all over the island, really.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure there's access to the scientific, the labs basically, and the various, that there's capacity across the education system that everybody can participate. So it's something I would endorse 100%. And again, we're open to work with the education authorities here in North and South to promote that.
John Hume, I campaigned for John Hume. And John Hume's statement that you can't eat a flag. He wanted, and he always wanted, jobs. He worked and he got the International Fund for Ireland set up. He got the American Ireland Fund set up. He did, and he sweated and he spilt his blood, his sweat on jobs, on getting jobs into this city. And we have Seagate Technology, DuPont. We have a number of large multinational companies.
Absolutely, and I think we all echo that here. I'm sorry, we're running out of time, and I want to give, there's another gentleman, I'd just like to give this gentleman the opportunity to ask a very quick question before we wrap up. Go ahead, sir. Well, again, to repeat that, just for the benefit of our online audience, the gentleman's question is about cross-border travel for people who aren't maybe Irish or British citizens, and I suppose the commitment that the Irish government might make on that.
I think my officials in my department have met with you, I think, on this, and we're trying to work it through with the Department of Justice. There's a legitimate issue there that needs to be addressed, and I'm open to meeting with you as well at some stage in the future. Because there are obviously issues, but I mean, certainly we don't want borders in terms of people moving to and from, in terms of work and so on like that, or you've given the examples there, people who are resident and so on. So look, we'll continue to work with you to bring a resolution to that. And we might meet some future date if we can organise it. I know Angle is here with us, I think, was saying to me that there has been meetings already, so we'll get working on that.
Thank you. I know we could stay and chat all night, but I think we would be dragged off the stage if we did, so we're going to have to call it here.
I apologise for appearing, actually, but the lighting is such that...
Yeah, it's actually very hard for us to see you, so apologies. Before I introduce Sean Farron, just to wrap up the evening, finally, I just want to say thank you myself to our panellists, to Brian Dougherty, Mary McKenna, Kevin Murphy, and of course Taoiseach Micheál Martin. Thank you all very much, and thank you. And, Sean.
Words out of my mouth in expressing thanks. My thanks begin with, in particular, to the Playhouse for hosting this evening's event. This is the first of a series, I think, of events which, together with the Playhouse, the Hume Foundation will... Sorry, okay, and I'll start again. Okay.
Keep going.
Well, I'm expressing my thanks to the Playhouse for hosting our event this evening. It's the first of a growing association and partnership with the Playhouse, between the Playhouse and the Foundation, more of which will soon be announced. My thanks on behalf of the Foundation to the Taoiseach for your address. Very comprehensive outline of the steps being taken by you and by your government to build the common ground. Many lessons in what you said for all organisations and individuals working on a cross-border basis here in the Northwest in particular. Our thanks also to the panel. Freya has expressed our general thanks. My thanks to Michael, the chair of the Playhouse. My thanks to Kevin. My thanks to Mary. And my thanks to Freya and to Brian. My thanks also to Terry Cross for sponsoring the reception this evening. And my thanks very much to our own Tim Atwood, who has been working ceaselessly along with the representatives from the Playhouse in putting together this evening's event. My thanks finally to yourselves for coming along, for showing your support to the event, and we look forward to future engagements here in the city, which will bring us in touch with a wider audience. And finally, if John and Pat were here with us, they would find many of their words of inspiration echoed in what the Taoiseach said and what the panelists said in their contribution. And they remain our main, of course, inspiration within the Foundation. We hope that the work that we are undertaking will in fact reflect the values, the beliefs, and the commitments of John and Pat Hume. Thank you all very much. Good evening.
Thank you very much. Thanks. It's a beautiful theatre. And dramatic.